Nobody expected Charles Hartman to solve the complex engine problem that stumped every certified mechanic in the county. Living in a weathered trailer at Woodbury Meadows with his teenage daughter Amelia, Charles was just scraping by until Audrey Woodward's luxury vehicle broke down near his home. With nothing but basic tools and forgotten brilliance, he didn't just fix the specialized engine. He improved it. The next morning, residents of Woodbury watched in disbelief as a helicopter landed outside his trailer, carrying Pamela Woodward, CEO of a global technology company, and Audrey's mother. This is the story of a hidden genius forced into obscurity by corporate betrayal and personal tragedy, whose roadside repair revealed the extraordinary talent that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The copper-colored sun broke through thick clouds, casting long shadows across Woodbury Meadows Trailer Park. A gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass mixed with the metallic tang of motor oil. Charles Hartman, 42, with a spine curved from years of labor, crouched beside an old Chevy pickup. His weathered hands worked methodically to replace a worn-out alternator, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. His faded blue work shirt hung loosely on his lean frame, the name patch reading Charlie, almost illegible from countless washes. The truck belonged to Mrs. Peterson, a 75-year-old widow who paid him with home-cooked meals more often than cash. "Almost done, Mrs. Peterson," Charles called out, his voice a quiet rumble. "Should start right up now." The elderly woman stood on her tiny porch, clutching a thermos. "You're a godsend, Charlie. Don't know what I'd do without you." Charles tightened the last bolt and closed the hood with practiced gentleness. His eyes, deep blue and surrounded by crow's feet, revealed a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He wiped his hands on a rag that had once been white, now stained with the history of 100 repairs. "Let's give it a try," he said, sliding into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the first try, purring with renewed life. Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands in delight, shuffling forward to hand him the thermos. "Fresh coffee, and I insist you take this too." She pressed $20 into his palm. "That's too much," Charles protested, trying to return the money. "Nonsense. Warren Schmidt would have charged me $100 at his garage. You're too good for your own good, Charlie Hartman." Charles pocketed the money with a reluctant nod. $20 wouldn't solve his problems, but it would put gas in his own truck for the week. As he gathered his tools, his phone buzzed with a text message from his daughter. "Dad, don't forget I need the registration fee for the science competition by tomorrow. $50. Sorry." Charles stared at the message, his jaw tightening. Another expense he hadn't budgeted for. But Amelia's science competitions were non-negotiable. They were her ticket out of this life, her chance at the future he'd promised Sarah before she died. "Everything okay?" Mrs. Peterson asked, noticing his expression. "Fine." Charles managed a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just fine." The walk back to his own trailer took less than 5 minutes. Woodbury Meadows was small, a collection of modest mobile homes arranged in neat rows along cracked asphalt pathways. Charles's home sat at the end of Willow Lane, distinguished by the small vegetable garden Amelia had planted and the makeshift workshop he'd assembled under a tarp beside it. He climbed the 3 metal steps, each one creaking under his weight. Inside, the trailer was spotless, worn but immaculately clean. A wall of photographs chronicled a life that felt increasingly distant. Charles in a graduation cap and gown, Charles in a lab coat standing proudly next to a prototype engine, Charles and Sarah on their wedding day, and finally, baby Amelia cradled in her mother's arms. The kitchen table was covered with papers, bills marked final notice, a letter from the trailer park management about a rent increase, and scattered job applications. Charles swept them into a drawer and checked the time. 2:30 p.m. Amelia would be home from school soon, and he needed to find another repair job before the end of the day. He was rummaging through the refrigerator when a knock came at the door. Benjamin Lopez, his neighbor from 2 trailers down, stood on the steps, his round face creased with concern. "Hey, Charlie, Tom Parker's making rounds again. Says he's going to start evictions next week for anyone more than 2 months behind." Charles's stomach tightened. "Thanks for the heads up, Ben." "How far behind are you?" Benjamin asked, lowering his voice although there was no one else around. 6 weeks, Charles admitted. But I've got a line on a few jobs. Should be able to get him half by Friday. Benjamin shifted uncomfortably. Listen, I got some overtime at the plant this week. I could spot you. No. Charles cut him off firmly but not unkindly. We'll be fine. But thanks. After Benjamin left, Charles pulled out his phone and started making calls. 3 rejections later, he finally got a lead. A farmer on the outskirts of town needed his tractor repaired. The pay would barely cover the registration fee for Amelia's competition, but it was something. He was gathering his tools when he heard the school bus rumble to a stop at the entrance to the trailer park. Minutes later, Amelia bounded up the steps, her backpack slung over one shoulder, long brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, eyes bright with excitement despite the dark circles underneath them. Dad, Mrs. Foster says my science project on alternative fuel efficiency has a real shot at the state finals. If I win, there's a scholarship opportunity for the engineering summer program at Brighton University. Charles's face softened as he looked at his daughter. At 16, Amelia had already weathered more storms than most adults. Losing her mother at 8, moving from a comfortable suburban home to a trailer park, watching her father struggle to rebuild their lives. Yet her resilience never wavered. That's fantastic, sweetheart, he said, genuine pride warming his voice. And don't worry about the registration fee. It's covered. Amelia's smile faltered. You didn't take another payday loan, did you? No, Charles shook his head. Got a job fixing Mrs. Peterson's truck, and I'm heading out to the Harrison farm to look at a tractor after dinner. I could come with you, Amelia offered, already setting down her backpack. Help out. Make it go faster. Charles considered refusing. It was a school night, and Amelia needed to work on her project. But the truth was, she had a natural talent for mechanical work that sometimes surpassed his own, like father, like daughter. Dinner first, he compromised. Then we'll see. They ate a simple meal of spaghetti with sauce from the jar Amelia had been carefully rationing all week. Charles noticed she took a smaller portion than usual, probably stretching the food to last until his next paycheck. The observation sent a wave of familiar shame through him. How was the rest of school? He asked, steering his thoughts away from their financial situation. Amelia shrugged, twirling pasta around her fork. Same old. Jason Brooks made some comment about trailer trash. I ignored him. Charles's hand tightened around his fork. That kid still giving you trouble? It's nothing, Dad. His parents own half the businesses in town. He thinks that makes him better than everyone else. She changed the subject quickly. Did you hear back from any of the engineering firms you applied to? The question hit like a physical blow. Charles had sent out dozens of applications over the past year, hoping to return to the field he'd once excelled in. The rejections, when they bothered to respond at all, cited his 10-year absence from the industry, or politely mentioned that his knowledge was outdated. Not yet, he lied, unwilling to add to her worries. These things take time. After dinner, Charles decided to tackle the tractor repair alone. Stay and work on your project, he told Amelia. This shouldn't take more than a couple hours. As he loaded his tools into his battered pickup truck, Charles tried to ignore the check engine light that had been illuminated for months. One more thing he couldn't afford to fix. The truck sputtered to life on the 3rd try, and he backed out of the narrow space beside their trailer. The sun was beginning to set as he drove out of Woodbury Meadows, casting the rows of trailers in golden light that almost made them look charming rather than desperate. The main road into town was mostly empty, local businesses already closed for the day. Charles was passing the "Welcome to Woodbury" sign when he noticed a sleek black vehicle on the side of the road, a high-end electric hybrid that looked wildly out of place in their small town. Hazard lights blinked steadily, and a young woman in expensive-looking clothes stood beside it, phone in hand, frustration evident in her posture. He almost drove past. He was already running late for the tractor job, and people with cars like that usually called premium roadside assistance. But something made him slow down. Maybe it was the darkening sky or the isolated stretch of road. Or maybe it was simply that Sarah would have expected him to stop. Charles pulled over and rolled down his window. Having trouble? The young woman, mid-20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat, shining bun, looked up with obvious relief. Yes, it just died. I've called 3 mechanics in town, but they all say they can't get out here until morning, and I have an important meeting in Brighton Heights first thing tomorrow. Mind if I take a look? Charles offered. I'm a mechanic. Well, sort of. The woman hesitated, her eyes taking in his weathered appearance and ancient truck. Charles was used to that look, the quick assessment that usually ended in dismissal. I'm Audrey, she said finally. Audrey Woodward, and yes, please, I'd appreciate any help. Charles introduced himself as he stepped out of his truck, tools already in hand. The car was a Woodward Pulse, a limited production hybrid that combined electric power with a specialized combustion engine. He recognized it immediately, though he'd never worked on one personally. These are rare, he commented, running his hand along the sleek hood. The Pulse isn't even in full production yet. Audrey raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his knowledge. It's a prototype. My mother's company manufactures them. I'm doing a long-term test drive. The name Woodward clicked into place in Charles's mind. Woodward Technologies, one of the largest automotive innovation companies in the country. He'd applied for a position there 6 months ago and received a form rejection letter 2 weeks later. Let me see what we're dealing with, he said, propping open the hood. The engine compartment was unlike anything most mechanics would recognize, a sophisticated hybrid system with components that were clearly custom designed. Charles felt a familiar excitement stir within him, the same feeling he'd experienced in labs and testing facilities a lifetime ago. Audrey watched as he methodically examined connections and components, his movements confident and precise despite the fading light. You seem to know what you're looking at, she observed. Most mechanics just stare at it in confusion. Charles didn't respond immediately, his attention caught by something in the electrical system. Your integrated power management module is showing signs of stress. There's a design flaw in the connection to the thermal regulator. How can you possibly know that? Audrey asked, incredulous. Because I would have designed it differently, Charles replied absently, already reaching for his tools. This setup creates unnecessary heat during the transition from electric to combustion, which eventually damages the connections. For the next 45 minutes, Charles worked with complete focus, occasionally asking Audrey to hand him a tool or shine her phone's flashlight on a particular component. The sky darkened completely, and the temperature dropped, but he barely noticed. Finally, he straightened up, wiping his hands on his work shirt. Try it now. Audrey slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine hummed to life, the sound smoother and more even than before. That's amazing, she said, stepping back out. It sounds better than when I first drove it off the production line. I rerouted part of the electrical system and adjusted the thermal regulator, Charles explained. It'll run more efficiently now, probably improve your mileage by about 15%. Audrey stared at him, her expression transforming from relief to intense curiosity. Who are you? Charles Hartman. No ordinary small-town mechanic could fix this car, let alone improve it. Charles looked away, suddenly uncomfortable under her scrutiny. Just someone who's good with engines. How much do I owe you? Nothing, he said, already packing up his tools. Glad I could help. Wait, Audrey called, reaching into her purse. At least let me pay you for your time. Charles hesitated. He desperately needed the money, especially after missing the tractor job. But something in him rebelled against taking payment for what had been, truthfully, the most interesting work he'd done in years. How about this? Audrey said, sensing his reluctance. My mother's company is always looking for talented engineers and mechanics. Let me give her your name. A bitter smile crossed Charles's face. I already applied to Woodward Technologies, got rejected. Audrey's eyebrows rose. You applied as a mechanic? As an engineer, Charles corrected quietly. A long time ago, that's what I was. Understanding dawned in Audrey's eyes. And now you're fixing cars in a small town. She pulled out a business card, pressing it into his hand. "Call this number tomorrow. It's my direct line. I want to hear more about that design flaw you identified." Charles pocketed the card, not believing for a moment that anything would come of it. People like Audrey Woodward made promises easily, but once back in their world of luxury and privilege, those promises were quickly forgotten. "Drive safe," he said, climbing back into his truck. "If you have any more trouble with it, I live in the Woodbury Meadows trailer park, last unit on Willow Lane." As he pulled away, Charles glanced in his rearview mirror. Audrey stood in the pool of her headlights, watching him go, her phone already pressed to her ear. The tractor job was lost. He'd called to explain about stopping to help a stranded motorist, but the farmer had already contacted someone else. That meant no money for Amelia's registration fee, at least not until he found another job. Charles drove home slowly, the weight of his responsibilities settling back onto his shoulders after the brief respite of working on a challenging engine. For those few minutes, he'd been Charles Hartman, the engineer again, not Charles, the struggling single father, the unemployable ex-professional, the barely getting by handyman. Amelia was asleep when he returned, her science project notes spread across the kitchen table. He stood in the doorway of her tiny bedroom, watching the rise and fall of her chest, remembering his promise to Sarah that their daughter would have opportunities, that she would never have to settle for less than she was capable of achieving. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered to the darkness. "I'm still trying." Charles placed the $20 from Mrs. Peterson beside Amelia's textbook, knowing it wasn't enough but hoping it would help. Then he unfolded the couch in the living room that served as his bed, too exhausted to even shower away the day's grime. As sleep finally claimed him, he had no way of knowing that across town, in the finest hotel Woodbury had to offer, Audrey Woodward was on a video call with her mother, describing in detail the mysterious mechanic who had not only fixed her prototype vehicle, but had improved its design with nothing but basic tools and extraordinary knowledge. Nor could he have imagined that Pamela Woodward, CEO of Woodward Technologies and one of the most powerful women in the automotive industry, was already instructing her assistant to gather every piece of information available on one Charles Hartman of Woodbury, with particular attention to his engineering background and any patents he might have held. And he certainly couldn't have known that by this time tomorrow, his life would be unrecognizable, transformed by a chance encounter on a lonely stretch of road where his past and future were about to violently collide. The first light of dawn filtered through the thin curtains of Charles's trailer. He stirred on the worn-out couch, his back protesting after another night on the lumpy cushions. For a moment, he lay still, mentally calculating the day ahead, what jobs he might find, how much money he needed to scrape together for Amelia's competition fee, whether he could afford to fix the truck's check engine light before it became a more serious problem. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Charles glanced at the clock. 5:47 a.m. Far too early for casual visitors. He pulled on a t-shirt and padded to the door in his worn sweatpants. Benjamin Lopez stood on the steps, his work uniform already on, cap clutched in his hands. "Charlie, you've got to see this. There's a woman asking for you at the park entrance, driving one of those fancy SUVs with a driver and everything." Charles frowned, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What woman?" "Didn't catch her name, but she looks important, wearing a suit that probably costs more than my trailer." Understanding dawned on Charles's face. Audrey Woodward. Benjamin shrugged. "Could be. She said it's urgent." "Tell her I'll be right there," Charles said, already reaching for his cleanest pair of jeans. 5 minutes later, Charles walked briskly toward the entrance of Woodbury Meadows, conscious of curious neighbors peering through their windows. A black SUV with tinted windows idled by the rusted park sign, sleek and alien among the aging vehicles that populated the trailer park. It wasn't Audrey who stepped out of the back seat, but an older woman, early 50s, with the same auburn hair but streaked with elegant silver cut in a sharp bob that emphasized high cheekbones and intelligent eyes. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Mr. Hartman," she extended her hand. "Pamela Woodward. I believe you met my daughter Audrey last night." Charles accepted the handshake, acutely aware of his faded t-shirt and the engine grease still embedded in his calloused palms. Yes, ma'am. Her car broke down. And you fixed it. Pamela's gaze was appraising, measuring him against some internal standard. May we speak privately? I have a proposition that might interest you. Charles hesitated, glancing back at his trailer. My daughter's still sleeping. I don't want to leave her alone. Pamela nodded, her expression softening slightly. Of course. Perhaps there's a cafe in town where we could talk? I'd be happy to drive you. The Rise and Shine opens at 6, Charles suggested. It's just down the road. I can follow in my truck. The Rise and Shine diner was nearly empty when they arrived. Only a couple of early shift factory workers occupying the counter seats. Judy, the owner, did a double take when Pamela Woodward walked in, her designer attire creating an almost comical contrast against the diner's vinyl booths and laminate tables. Coffee, Charlie? Judy called, recovering quickly. And for your guest? Black for me, Charles confirmed, and whatever Ms. Woodward would like. The same, Pamela said, sliding into a booth near the window. Once Judy had brought their coffees and retreated with obvious curiosity, Pamela opened her leather portfolio. My daughter was quite impressed with your work last night, Mr. Hartman. Not many people could diagnose, let alone repair, the issue with the pulse prototype. Charles wrapped his hands around the warm mug. It wasn't that complicated. The thermal regulator was creating excessive heat during power transition because the connection design was flawed. Pamela finished for him. Yes, Audrey told me. She also mentioned you improved the system by rerouting part of the electrical framework. Charles shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just a small adjustment. An adjustment our team of engineers has been struggling to make for months, Pamela countered. She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. You applied to Woodward Technologies 8 months ago as an engineer and got rejected. Charles confirmed, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Regrettably, Pamela acknowledged. Human resources handles thousands of applications. Many talented individuals slip through the cracks. Charles met her gaze directly. Is that what this is about? You're here to offer me a job? In a manner of speaking. Pamela slid a document across the table. I've had my assistant pull every bit of information available on you, Mr. Hartman. Your work at Davidson Automotive, the patents you developed for their hybrid engine systems, and most interestingly, your abrupt departure 10 years ago followed by the company's sudden advancement in the very technologies you pioneered. Charles stiffened, his hand tightening around the coffee mug. Those were memories he'd worked hard to bury, remnants of a life that had disintegrated around him with breathtaking speed. That's ancient history, he said tightly. Perhaps, but it explains why a man with your talents is fixing tractors in Woodbury instead of designing the next generation of automotive technology. Pamela leaned forward. They stole your work, didn't they? And when you fought back, they buried you. The words hung in the diner's morning air, so close to the truth that Charles felt exposed, as if she'd somehow peeled back his skin to reveal the raw wounds beneath. My wife got sick while I was fighting the lawsuit, he said finally, his voice quiet. Lung cancer. By the time I realized we were going to lose in court, she was in stage 4. The medical bills. He trailed off, the memories still sharp enough to draw blood. I dropped the case, took the settlement they offered. It barely covered Sarah's treatments, but it gave us a few more months together. Pamela's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Hartman. Charles nodded, accepting her condolence without comment. After Sarah died, I tried to rebuild my career, but Davidson had blackballed me throughout the industry. No one would touch me, so I did what I had to do to take care of Amelia. End of story. Not quite, Pamela said, straightening in her seat. I believe there's another chapter waiting to be written. Woodward Technologies is developing a new hybrid system, the next generation beyond the pulse. We've hit some roadblocks. After what Audrey told me about your work last night, I think you might be exactly the person we need to overcome them. You want me as a consultant? I want you as our new Director of Innovation, overseeing the entire hybrid development program. Pamela named a salary figure that made Charles blink in disbelief. Plus, relocation assistance, comprehensive benefits, and educational support for your daughter. Charles sat back, stunned by the offer. It was everything he'd once dreamed of. A chance to return to the work he loved, financial security, a future for Amelia beyond Woodbury Meadows. "This feels a little too serendipitous," he said cautiously. "Why would you offer a position like that to someone you've just met, based on one repair job?" "I'm not offering it to someone I just met," Pamela corrected. "I'm offering it to the engineer who revolutionized thermal regulation systems at Davidson, who holds patents on 3 key technologies they're still using, and who had the insight to improve my prototype with nothing but basic tools and extraordinary skill." She paused, a slight smile touching her lips. "Besides, I've always enjoyed stealing talent from under Edward Davidson's nose. Consider it corporate karma." Charles took a long sip of his coffee, buying time to process the opportunity being dangled before him. It seemed almost fictional in its perfection, a deus ex machina solution to all his problems arriving precisely when he needed it most. "I'd need to think about it," he said carefully. "Talk it over with Amelia. Brighton Heights is a long way from everything she knows." "Of course." Pamela reached into her portfolio again. "Here's the formal offer letter with all details outlined. Take your time. You have until the end of the week." She glanced at her watch. "Now I have one more thing to discuss, which I believe requires a direct demonstration. Is there somewhere open with a clear view of your trailer?" Charles frowned at the odd request. "The community field is right behind my place. Why?" "You'll see," Pamela replied with an enigmatic smile. "Shall we?" They drove back to Woodbury Meadows, Charles's mind racing with possibilities. The trailer park was fully awake now, residents heading to work or school, casting curious glances at the black SUV following Charles's battered pickup. As they parked, Charles spotted Amelia standing outside their trailer, still in her pajamas, a confused expression on her face as she stared at her phone. When she saw him, she hurried over. "Dad, where were you? I woke up and you were gone. And then I got this weird text about a full scholarship to the Brighton summer engineering program." She broke off, finally noticing Pamela emerging from the SUV. "Who's that?" "Amelia, this is Ms. Woodward. She's the CEO of Woodward Technologies. Ms. Woodward, my daughter." Pamela extended her hand, smiling warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Amelia. Your father has quite a talent for engineering. I understand you might share that interest." Amelia shook her hand, wide-eyed. "Yes, ma'am. I'm working on a project about alternative fuel efficiency for the state science competition. I'd love to hear about it sometime, perhaps during your summer program at Brighton University." Amelia's mouth fell open. "You're the one who sent the scholarship offer? But how? Why?" Charles put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Ms. Woodward has offered me a job, Leah, as an engineer with her company. We're discussing it." "It's a bit more than just a job," Pamela clarified. "Your father would be heading our entire innovation department. But that's not what I brought him back to show you both." She checked her watch again. "In fact, if you'd both follow me to the community field, we should be right on time." Bewildered, Charles and Amelia followed Pamela through the trailer park to the open grassy area behind their unit. A few children were playing on the rusted swing set, and an elderly man walked his small dog along the perimeter. "Perfect," Pamela said, checking her phone. "And here we are." At first, Charles heard it rather than saw it, a rhythmic thumping that grew steadily louder. Then, appearing over the tree line, a sleek black helicopter emerged, the distinctive Woodward Technologies logo emblazoned on its side. Amelia gasped, clutching her father's arm. Around them, activity in the trailer park ground to a halt as residents stepped outside to witness the extraordinary sight. The helicopter circled once, then began to descend toward the open field, the downdraft creating a small windstorm that sent loose papers and debris skittering across the grass. "What is this?" Charles had to shout over the noise of the rotors. Pamela's expression was triumphant as she watched the helicopter touch down gracefully on the patchy grass. "This, Mr. Hartman, is your transportation to Brighton Heights. I thought you might appreciate seeing our facilities before making your decision, and the view from the air is quite spectacular." The rotors slowed but didn't stop completely. The pilot, in a crisp uniform, opened the door and waited expectantly. Charles stared at the helicopter, then at Pamela, struggling to process the sheer audacity of her gesture. "You flew a helicopter to my trailer park to take me on a tour of your company. Time is money, Mr. Hartman, and I believe in making an impression." She gestured toward the waiting aircraft. "Shall we? The tour should only take a few hours. You'll be back in plenty of time for dinner." "Can I come too?" Amelia asked, her voice vibrating with excitement. Pamela smiled. "I was counting on it. Your scholarship packet is waiting for you at the university's engineering department. I thought we might stop there first." Charles hesitated, suddenly conscious of his shabby clothes and the curious stares of his neighbors. Part of him wanted to refuse on principle. This flashy display felt manipulative, designed to dazzle him into acceptance. But another part, the part that remembered the thrill of creation, of solving complex problems with elegant solutions, was already imagining walking into a state-of-the-art engineering facility, surrounded by the tools and technology he'd been denied for so long. And then, there was the look on Amelia's face. Pure wonder mixed with the first real hope he'd seen there in years. "Give us 10 minutes to change," he said finally. Pamela nodded. "Of course, the helicopter isn't going anywhere." As Charles and Amelia hurried back to their trailer, whispers followed them. Warren Schmidt stood outside his garage across the street, mouth agape as he watched the scene unfold. Next to him, one of his mechanics pointed at Charles, clearly explaining to Warren exactly who the helicopter had come for. Inside the trailer, Amelia was practically bouncing with energy. "Dad, this is incredible. A real job as an engineer, and the summer program. Do you know how competitive that is? Only 12 students get in each year." Charles pulled his one good shirt from the closet, a button-down that had survived from his previous life, now slightly too large for his leaner frame. "Slow down, Leah. We haven't decided anything yet." "What's there to decide?" Amelia stopped suddenly, uncertain. "Unless you don't want to go back to engineering?" Charles sighed, facing his daughter. "It's not that simple. Brighton Heights is expensive. We'd be starting over completely. And what if it doesn't work out? What if I'm not what they're looking for?" Amelia's expression softened. She stepped forward, straightening her father's collar with a gesture that reminded him painfully of Sarah. "Dad, you've spent the last 10 years making sure I had opportunities, even when it meant giving up everything you loved. Maybe it's time you got a second chance too." Charles felt his throat tighten with emotion. When had his little girl grown so wise? "When did you get so smart?" "I had a good teacher," Amelia replied, smiling. "Now come on. There's a helicopter waiting for us." "A helicopter, Dad?" Minutes later, they walked back to the field, both dressed in the best clothes they owned. Charles had to admit there was something undeniably satisfying about the expressions on his neighbors' faces as he and Amelia approached the sleek aircraft, particularly Warren Schmidt, who had rejected his job application just 6 months earlier, with the comment that Charles was overqualified for real mechanics work. Pamela waited by the helicopter door, speaking on her phone. She ended the call as they approached. "Ready for your tour, Mr. Hartman?" Charles took a deep breath, gazing at the machine that symbolized everything he'd lost and might now regain. "Ready as I'll ever be." As the three of them boarded the helicopter, Charles caught sight of Benjamin Lopez giving him a thumbs up from beside his trailer. For the first time in years, Charles felt a sense of possibility unfurling within him, cautious still, bruised by past disappointments, but undeniably alive. The helicopter lifted off, rising above Woodbury Meadows, above the trailer that had been both refuge and prison for the past 5 years. From this height, the park looked almost picturesque, the morning sun glinting off metal roofs, the neat rows of homes like a carefully arranged model. Charles watched it recede, one chapter of his life potentially closing as another opened before him. He still wasn't sure if he would accept Pamela's offer. The memory of corporate betrayal cut too deep for blind trust. But for the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to imagine a future not constrained by daily survival. Beside him, Amelia pressed her face to the window, her expression awestruck as they soared over the landscape toward Brighton Heights. And in that moment, Whatever reservations he harbored about Pamela Woodward's motives seemed less important than the simple fact that his daughter was flying, literally and figuratively, toward the opportunities he'd always promised her. The helicopter banked gently, heading southwest toward the gleaming towers of Brighton Heights visible on the horizon, structures that seemed to belong to a different world than the one Charles had inhabited for so long. He settled back in his seat, uncertain what awaited him but finally ready to find out. The Woodward Technologies headquarters rose from the landscaped grounds like a vision from another world. 6 stories of glass and steel curved into an aerodynamic shape that mimicked the company's automotive designs. Fountains punctuated pristine gardens where employees in business attire strolled between meetings or sat on benches with tablets and coffee. The helicopter descended onto a landing pad marked with the Woodward logo. As the rotors slowed, Charles gazed through the window, memories surfacing of similar corporate campuses he'd once moved through with confidence. Now he felt like an imposter, acutely aware of his worn shoes and discount store jeans beneath his one decent shirt. "Impressive, isn't it?" Pamela asked, noting his expression. "We designed the building to embody our philosophy, traditional materials reimagined through innovative architecture." "It's like something from a movie," Amelia whispered, her eyes wide as the pilot opened the door. They stepped onto the helipad where a tall man in a tailored suit waited with barely concealed impatience. His silver hair was expertly styled, his posture rigid as he checked his watch. "Pamela, the board meeting started 15 minutes ago," he said, ignoring Charles and Amelia. "Henderson is presenting the quarterly projections, and he's making your department look like a money pit again. Douglas, meet Charles Hartman, our potential new director of innovation," Pamela replied smoothly. "And his daughter Amelia. Charles, this is Douglas Weber, our VP of Operations." Douglas's expression shifted from irritation to assessment as he extended his hand. "Hartman, the engineer from Davidson who's going to solve our thermal regulation issues." "Yes," Pamela interrupted, her tone pleasant but firm. "Please let the board know I'll be there within the hour. I'm giving the Hartmans a tour of our facilities first." Douglas hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and curiosity. "I'll make your excuses, but Henderson's out for blood today. He's already questioning the additional R&D budget for the Pulse program." "Then it's fortunate I found someone who can justify that investment," Pamela replied. She turned to Charles and Amelia. "Shall we begin the tour? I believe Jason is waiting for us at the main entrance." As they walked across the helipad toward a glass-enclosed walkway, Charles couldn't help asking, "Who's Henderson?" "Board member with a very limited imagination," Pamela answered, her tone light, but her eyes hardening slightly. "Believes quarterly profits are more important than long-term innovation. Men like him would have us still making gas-guzzling SUVs and ignoring climate change." The glass walkway led to a soaring atrium where natural light streamed through strategically placed skylights. A young man in a lab coat approached, his expression eager. "Ms. Woodward, welcome back," he said. "Everything's prepared for the tour." "Thank you, Jason. This is Mr. Hartman and his daughter Amelia." She explained to Charles, "Jason is one of our junior engineers. He'll be showing us around the innovation lab while I handle a few pressing matters. I'll rejoin you there." As Pamela departed toward the executive wing, Jason led Charles and Amelia through security, providing them with visitor badges. "It's an honor to meet you, Mr. Hartman," he said as they walked. "Ms. Woodward told us about your work on the Pulse prototype. Incredible that you diagnosed that thermal issue with just basic tools." "You knew about the problem?" Charles asked. Jason nodded, lowering his voice slightly. "The whole engineering team has been struggling with it for months. We've been losing efficiency during the power transition phase, but no one could pinpoint why. The computer models all said it should work perfectly." "Sometimes hands-on experience trumps computer models," Charles replied. "You need to feel the system working to understand where the friction points are." "That's exactly what I've been saying." Jason's enthusiasm was palpable. "But most of the senior engineers are so dependent on the simulations that they've forgotten what an engine actually feels like when it's running properly." They entered an elevator that whisked them silently to the 3rd floor. When the doors opened, Charles found himself looking into a space that made his heart beat faster. a vast engineering lab filled with the latest equipment, prototype engines in various stages of assembly, and teams of people engaged in the work he'd once lived for. "This is our main innovation space," Jason explained, leading them into the lab. "We are currently focusing on the next generation of the pulse system, aiming for 30% higher efficiency with a significant reduction in production costs." Charles approached a partially assembled engine mounted on a testing rig, his fingers instinctively reaching toward it before he caught himself. "May I?" "Of course," Jason said. "That's actually the same model that Miss Woodward's daughter was driving, the one you repaired." Charles ran his hands over the components, his mind already cataloging improvements, identifying pressure points, seeing possibilities that had probably been overlooked. It was like reuniting with an old friend, the familiar language of mechanical systems speaking to him again after a long silence. Amelia moved beside him, her own analytical gaze taking in the setup. "Dad, look at how they've configured the power management system. It's similar to what we talked about for my science project, but they're using a different approach to the energy transfer." Charles nodded, pride washing over him at his daughter's quick understanding. "Good eye, Leah. They're prioritizing speed of transition over longevity. Makes sense for performance stats, but it creates wear issues down the line." Jason looked between them, clearly impressed. "That's exactly the trade-off we've been debating. The performance team wants the fastest possible transition, but maintenance is concerned about long-term reliability." For the next hour, they toured the innovation lab, with Charles growing more animated as he examined prototypes, reviewed technical specifications, and engaged with engineers who gradually gathered around the mysterious visitor who seemed to speak their language with remarkable fluency. By the time Pamela returned, Charles was deep in conversation with a group of engineers, sketching alternatives to their current thermal regulation system on a digital whiteboard. "I see you've made yourself at home," Pamela observed, unable to hide her satisfaction. Charles turned, suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry, I got carried away." "Don't apologize for passion, Mr. Hartman. It's precisely what we're looking for." She turned to the assembled engineers. "Thank you all for your time. Mr. Hartman hasn't officially accepted our offer yet, but I hope today's visit might persuade him." As the engineers dispersed, Pamela led Charles and Amelia to a quieter corner of the lab. "What do you think so far?" "It's impressive," Charles admitted. "The facilities, the talent. You've built something remarkable here." But, Pamela prompted, detecting his hesitation. Charles hesitated, then decided on honesty. "But I've been burned before. At Davidson, I believed I was part of something important until they took my work, claimed it as their own, and discarded me when I objected." Pamela nodded, her expression serious. "A valid concern. I'm familiar with Edward Davidson's methods. He built his company by exploiting talent and discarding it when convenient." She leaned in slightly. "I build mine by nurturing it. My name is on the building, Mr. Hartman. My reputation is tied to every product we create. I don't need to steal ideas. I need people who can generate them, refine them, and bring them to life." Charles studied her, searching for signs of deception but finding only straightforward determination. "I'd need assurances, clear ownership of my intellectual contributions, transparent credit for innovations." "All standard in our contracts," Pamela assured him. "We can have legal ad-specific language if it would make you more comfortable." Amelia, who had been exploring a nearby workstation, rejoined them. "Dad, they have the exact equipment I would need for my project here, and Jason said students in the summer program get access to all of it." Pamela smiled. "Which brings me to the next stop on our tour. I believe we have an appointment at Brighton University's engineering department." The university campus was only a 10-minute drive from Woodward headquarters. Unlike the corporate modernity of Woodward Technologies, Brighton University embraced traditional architecture, red brick buildings with white columns, sprawling lawns dotted with massive oak trees, and students moving between classes or lounging on the grass with books and laptops. The engineering building, however, was a striking contemporary addition, its design clearly influenced by function rather than historical aesthetics. Inside, Laboratories hummed with activity as students and professors engaged in various projects. Professor Helen Mitchell, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked black hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses, greeted them in the main hall. "Ms. Woodward, right on schedule. And you must be Amelia and Mr. Hartman." "Thank you for accommodating us on such short notice, Helen," Pamela said. "Any time. It's not every day we get a personal recommendation from you for our summer program." Professor Mitchell turned to Amelia. "Your application materials were quite impressive, young lady. Your project proposal on alternative fuel efficiency shows remarkable insight for someone your age." Amelia blushed. "Thank you, ma'am. I've arranged a tour of our facilities and a meeting with some current students in the program," Professor Mitchell continued. "Would that be acceptable?" "Perfect," Pamela agreed. "While you show Amelia around, perhaps Mr. Hartman and I could discuss a few remaining details about the position." As Amelia departed with Professor Mitchell, her excitement barely contained, Pamela led Charles to a small courtyard garden. They sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, the academic atmosphere a stark contrast to both Woodward's corporate environment and the trailer park Charles now called home. "Your daughter has remarkable potential," Pamela observed. "Helen doesn't impress easily." "She's always been smart," Charles agreed, watching as a group of students passed by, deep in conversation about some engineering principle. "Her mother was brilliant, a biochemist. Sarah always said Amelia got her analytical mind from both of us." "The summer program would be an incredible opportunity for her," Pamela said. "A foot in the door at one of the country's top engineering schools." Charles nodded, acutely aware of what was being offered. Not just a job for him, but a pathway for Amelia that he could never provide on his own. Yet something still held him back. "Why me?" he asked finally, turning to face Pamela directly. "There must be dozens of qualified engineers who jump at this position. Engineers without a 10-year gap in their resumes or a history of losing patent disputes." Pamela considered him for a moment before responding. "When I took over Woodward Technologies 15 years ago, it was a struggling mid-size parts manufacturer my father had built. I transformed it into what you see today by recognizing opportunities others missed." She gestured toward the engineering building. "Do you know what the most valuable resource is in our industry, Mr. Hartman? Not capital, not facilities, not even patents. It's insight, the ability to see solutions where others see only problems." Her gaze was steady, evaluating. "Last night you looked at a prototype that our entire engineering team has been refining for months, and within minutes, you not only diagnosed its fundamental flaw, but improved its efficiency by a significant margin. That kind of insight can't be taught. It can only be recognized and nurtured." Charles absorbed her words, feeling the weight of the decision before him. "And if I accept your offer, what exactly would my role entail?" "Initially solving our thermal regulation issues with the pulse system," Pamela replied. "Longer term, heading our innovation department, guiding the development of our next generation of vehicles. You'd have significant creative freedom, a team of talented engineers at your disposal, and resources most people in your position only dream about." She paused, then added, "You'd also have regular hours, comprehensive health care that would have covered your wife's treatments without bankrupting you, and an educational fund for Amelia that would ensure she could attend any university she qualifies for." The mention of Sarah's treatments struck a nerve. How different might their lives have been if he'd had access to better health care during her illness? If he hadn't been fighting a losing legal battle while trying to save his wife's life? "I'd need to start after Amelia's school year ends," he said finally. "I won't disrupt her education." Pamela's expression brightened. "Of course. We can arrange temporary accommodations until you find a suitable home. Brighton Heights has excellent schools, though from what I've seen, Amelia might benefit more from university-level challenges." Charles stood, gazing at the engineering building where his daughter was glimpsing a future that had seemed impossible just 24 hours ago. The weight of the past decade, the grief, the struggle, the daily compromises, pressed against his decision. "I need to talk to Amelia," he said. "This affects her life as much as mine." "Of course," Pamela agreed. "Helen's tour should be finishing soon. Shall we meet them inside?" They found Amelia in one of the laboratories, deep in conversation with two students from the summer program. Her face was animated in a way Charles hadn't seen in years, her hands gesturing enthusiastically as she explained some concept. When she spotted him, she rushed over. "Dad, this place is amazing. They have equipment I've only read about in journals, and the students here are working on projects that could actually change the world." Her eyes shone with excitement. Sarah and Marcos are designing a water filtration system for developing countries that uses locally available materials. They said I could help when I come for the summer program. The hope in her voice, the assumption that this future was now within reach, made Charles's decision suddenly clear. Whatever his reservations about corporate America, whatever scars he carried from his experience at Davidson, he couldn't deny Amelia this opportunity, not when her entire future might hinge on it. "That sounds incredible, Leah," he said, his voice soft with emotion. Professor Mitchell joined them, her expression approving as she watched Amelia's enthusiasm. "Your daughter would be a tremendous asset to our program, Mr. Hartman. Her understanding of engineering principles is remarkably advanced for someone her age." "She comes by it honestly," Pamela commented. "Her father is quite talented himself." Charles felt a flicker of long-dormant pride at the acknowledgement of his abilities, not as a handyman or mechanic, but as an engineer. For so long he'd buried that part of himself, focusing solely on survival. Now it was awakening again, like a limb regaining feeling after prolonged numbness. As they prepared to leave, Professor Mitchell handed Amelia an information packet. "All the details about the summer program are in here. Housing, schedule, project requirements. We'll look forward to seeing you in June." On the drive back to the helicopter pad, Amelia pored over the materials, her excitement building with each page. "Dad, look at these facilities, and there's a stipend for participants. We wouldn't have to pay for anything except my personal expenses." Charles glanced at Pamela, who was discreetly checking emails on her phone, giving them space to process the day's revelations. "Leah," he said quietly, "if we do this, if I take this job and you attend the summer program, our lives would change completely. We'd leave Woodbury behind, all your friends, your school." Amelia looked up from the packet, her expression suddenly serious beyond her years. "Dad, what friends? The kids at school either pity me or make fun of me for living in a trailer. And you?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I see how unhappy you are, fixing other people's engines when you could be designing your own. You've been putting your life on hold for me ever since Mom died." Charles felt his throat tighten at her perception. He'd tried so hard to shield her from his struggles, to present an optimistic front despite their circumstances. "I wanted to give you stability," he said softly. "You did," Amelia assured him, reaching for his hand. "But maybe now we both deserve something more. A chance to be who we're meant to be, not just who circumstances forced us to become." Her words echoed in Charles's mind as the helicopter lifted off once more, carrying them back toward Woodbury, back to the life they might soon leave behind. Below them, Brighton Heights gradually gave way to smaller communities, the landscape changing from corporate campuses and university grounds to factories, farms, and finally, the familiar patchwork of Woodbury itself. As they approached the trailer park, Charles could see that a small crowd had gathered near the community field. Neighbors, curious onlookers, even a van from the local news station, all waiting for the helicopter's return. As the extraordinary machine descended into the ordinary surroundings of Woodbury Meadows, Charles felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching his life from above, seeing clearly for the first time the constraints and possibilities that had shaped his existence these past 10 years. The helicopter touched down smoothly on the community field. Pamela turned to Charles as the rotors slowed. "I don't need your answer today, Mr. Hartman. Take the week to consider everything we've discussed." Charles glanced at Amelia, who was watching him with barely contained hope, then at the gathered crowd of neighbors, faces that reflected curiosity, envy, and in some cases, genuine happiness for his apparent good fortune. "I don't need a week," he said firmly. "We accept your offer." Pamela's smile was both pleased and relieved. "Excellent decision, Mr. Hartman. I'll have HR prepare the final paperwork. She extended her hand. Welcome to Woodward Technologies. As they disembarked from the helicopter, Charles spotted Warren Schmidt at the edge of the crowd, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief and calculation. Beside him stood Benjamin Lopez, grinning broadly and giving Charles an enthusiastic thumbs up. Looks like quite the welcoming committee, Pamela observed. Would you like me to stay, make a formal announcement? Charles shook his head. That won't be necessary. Word travels fast enough in Woodbury without official statements. She nodded, understanding. My assistant will contact you tomorrow to begin the onboarding process. And Amelia, she turned to the teenager with a warm smile. Professor Mitchell will send detailed information about summer housing next week. After Pamela departed and the helicopter lifted off, Charles and Amelia faced the approaching neighbors. Questions came from all directions about the helicopter, the mysterious visitor, the rumors already circulating about Charles's new position. Is it true, Charlie? Benjamin asked, pushing through the crowd. You're going to work for Woodward Technologies? Charles nodded, still processing the rapid turn of events himself. It's true. We'll be moving to Brighton Heights next month, after Amelia finishes the school year. Warren Schmidt shouldered his way forward, his usual bravado subdued. So you really were an engineer? I thought you were just talking big when you applied at my garage. I was an engineer, Charles corrected him quietly. And now I will be again. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Charles and Amelia returned to their trailer, closing the door on the outside world. Inside, the humble space looked different somehow. Not just a refuge from hardship, but a temporary station on a journey that was finally moving forward again. Amelia threw her arms around her father, her face pressed against his chest. We're really doing this, she whispered. It's really happening. Charles held his daughter close, allowing himself to fully embrace the hope he'd kept carefully contained for so long. Yes, he said softly. It's really happening. Later that evening, as Amelia excitedly packed up her science project to show her teacher the next day, Charles stepped outside to watch the sunset. The trailer park was peaceful, the golden light softening its worn edges, lending dignity to the modest homes and the lives contained within them. He walked to the small garden Amelia had planted, kneeling to touch the soil she had carefully tended, despite the uncertainties of their existence here. In that moment, Charles felt a profound gratitude for this place that had sheltered them during their darkest days, even as he prepared to leave it behind. From his pocket, he withdrew Sarah's wedding ring, the one possession he'd refused to sell even during their most desperate times. In the fading light, the simple gold band caught the sunset's glow, a tangible connection to the woman who had believed in his talents long before Pamela Woodward discovered them. We're going to be okay, Sarah, he whispered to the gathering dusk. Better than okay. Amelia's going to have everything we dreamed for her. The ring warmed in his palm, a small weight that had anchored him through turbulent years. But for the first time since Sarah's death, that weight felt like a connection rather than a burden. A reminder of what had been, but also a blessing for what might yet be. Charles slipped the ring back into his pocket and stood, gazing toward the horizon where Brighton Heights waited with its promises of new beginnings. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and plans, practical concerns about moving and housing, the complex logistics of rebuilding a life from its foundations. But tonight, in the quiet of Woodbury Meadows, Charles Hartman allowed himself a moment of pure, uncomplicated joy, the satisfaction of a man who had weathered the worst storms life could send and emerged, finally, into the clearing sky beyond. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation and paperwork. Charles found himself navigating a complex transition, signing employment contracts with carefully worded intellectual property clauses, arranging for the sale of his few possessions, and working with Woodward's relocation specialist to find temporary housing in Brighton Heights until he could purchase a proper home. The news of his dramatic change in fortune spread through Woodbury like wildfire. People who had barely acknowledged his existence for years suddenly found reasons to stop by his trailer, offering congratulations that sometimes felt genuine and sometimes tinged with envy or opportunism. Warren Schmidt made a particularly awkward appearance one afternoon as Charles was sorting through tools, deciding which to keep and which to sell. "Quite a setup you've got here," Warren commented, eyeing the meticulously organized toolbox. "Shame to break it up." Charles continued his sorting, neither encouraging nor discouraging the conversation. "Taking what I need, selling the rest." Warren shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "Listen, Charlie, about that job application last year. If I'd known about your background—" "You made a business decision," Charles interrupted not unkindly. "No hard feelings." "Right." Warren nodded, relief visible on his face. "Anyway, I was thinking, when you get settled at Woodward, if you need suppliers for specialized parts, my shop has connections." Charles looked up, a faint smile touching his lips at the transparent attempt to establish a profitable relationship. "I'll keep that in mind." Not everyone's approach was self-serving. Benjamin Lopez organized a farewell barbecue for the weekend before their departure, bringing together the neighbors who had shown genuine kindness during their years at Woodbury Meadows. Mrs. Peterson brought her famous apple pie. "Who's going to fix my truck now?" she asked, patting Charles's arm affectionately. "I've arranged for Michael at the Sunoco station to look after it," Charles assured her. "He's got your maintenance schedule and promised to keep the rates reasonable." "Won't be the same," she sighed. "But I'm proud of you, Charlie. Always knew you were meant for bigger things." The most difficult goodbye came from Angela Foster, Amelia's science teacher, who arrived at their trailer on the final evening before the move. She carried a gift-wrapped package and an expression of mingled pride and sadness. "I wanted to give you this before you left," she said, handing the package to Amelia. "A small token to remember Woodbury High." Amelia unwrapped it to find a framed certificate, her acceptance to the state science competition beautifully mounted with a photograph of her working on her project in the school lab. "I'm going to miss you terribly," Miss Foster admitted. "You're the most promising student I've had in 15 years of teaching." She turned to Charles. "You've raised an extraordinary young woman, Mr. Hartman. Her mother would be proud." Charles felt a lump form in his throat at the mention of Sarah. "She had a good teacher," he said quietly, and they both knew he wasn't just referring to Angela Foster. The day of departure arrived with surreal clarity. Their few remaining possessions were packed into Charles's truck and a small rental trailer. The barren interior of their mobile home felt alien after 5 years of making it a sanctuary against hardship. Charles stood in the empty living room, memories surfacing like photographs. Amelia studying at the kitchen table, the Christmas when he'd scraped together enough for a small tree, countless nights spent on the pull-out couch calculating how to stretch their limited resources just a little further. "Dad?" Amelia appeared in the doorway, keys in hand. "Everything's loaded. Are you ready?" Charles took one last look around, then nodded. "Ready." They locked the door for the final time and walked down the metal steps. Tom Parker, the landlord who had threatened eviction just weeks earlier, waited beside his pickup truck to collect the keys. "Trailer's in good shape," Charles said, handing them over. "Fixed the leaky faucet last week." Parker accepted the keys with a nod. "Never had a problem with you, Hartman. Paid on time when you could. Kept the place decent." He hesitated, then added gruffly, "Good luck in Brighton Heights. Don't forget where you came from." "Not likely," Charles replied, the simple exchange containing more genuine goodwill than he'd expected. As they prepared to leave, Charles noticed a familiar figure walking up the road toward them, Jason Brooks, the teenager who had bullied Amelia about living in the trailer park. Charles tensed instinctively, protective even in these final moments. But Jason's approach lacked its usual aggressive swagger. He stopped a respectful distance from Amelia, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Heard you're leaving," he said, eyes fixed on the ground. "Going to that fancy engineering program." Amelia nodded cautiously. "That's right. Just wanted to say—" Jason struggled visibly with whatever had prompted this unexpected visit. "Just good luck, I guess. You were always the smartest kid in class." The awkward compliment hung in the air. Amelia's expression softened slightly, recognizing the difficulty of this moment for someone who had defined himself through the belittlement of others. "Thanks, Jason," she said simply. Good luck to you too. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was closure. A final thread of their old life neatly tied before they embarked on the new one. The drive to Brighton Heights took just over 2 hours, but it might as well have been a journey to another planet. Woodbury, with its familiar rhythms and modest expectations, gave way to increasingly affluent communities, culminating in the gleaming prosperity of Brighton Heights itself. Their temporary accommodations were in a modern apartment complex near Woodward headquarters, a sleek 2-bedroom unit with floor-to-ceiling windows, stainless steel appliances, and furnishings that made their previous possessions look like artifacts from another era. "This is bigger than our whole trailer," Amelia marveled, exploring the spacious living room. "And look at this view." The panoramic windows offered a sweeping vista of Brighton Heights, the Woodward Technologies building visible in the distance, its curved architecture catching the afternoon light. It was beautiful, undeniably so. Yet Charles felt a momentary pang of dislocation, the sudden shift from survival mode to luxury creating a strange disconnect. "Dad?" Amelia's voice pulled him back to the present. "Are you okay?" Charles masked his discomfort with a smile. "Just taking it all in. Quite a change, isn't it?" "The best kind of change," Amelia asserted, her confidence bolstering his own. "A fresh start." That evening, as Amelia slept soundly in her new bedroom, Charles sat on the balcony, nursing a cup of coffee and watching the lights of Brighton Heights illuminate the darkness. His phone buzzed with a text message from Pamela. "All set for tomorrow. Car service will pick you up at 8 a.m. The team is eager to have you on board." Charles typed a brief acknowledgement, then returned to his contemplation of the city below. Tomorrow, he would step back into a world he'd thought lost to him forever, carrying a decade of hard-won wisdom and caution that his younger self had lacked. The anticipation he felt wasn't simple excitement. It was more complex, layered with determination, lingering wariness, and a fierce resolve to make this second chance count, not just for himself, but for Amelia and for Sarah's memory. Morning arrived with polished efficiency. A luxury sedan appeared precisely at 8 a.m., whisking Charles to Woodward headquarters, where an HR representative awaited with a security badge, company laptop, and stack of orientation materials. "Ms. Woodward asked that you be taken directly to the Innovation Lab after processing," the representative explained. "She's assembled the Pulse team for introductions." The familiarity of corporate rituals, security protocols, confidentiality agreements, benefit enrollments, felt both foreign and strangely comforting to Charles. By 9:30, he was being escorted to the Innovation Lab where he'd spent time during his tour. This time, however, he entered not as a visitor but as the new Director of Innovation. The shift in status was immediately apparent in how the assembled engineers straightened as he walked in, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, hope, and, in some cases, skepticism. Pamela Woodward stood at the front of the room beside a digital display of the Pulse engine schematics. "Ah, Mr. Hartman, right on time. Everyone, as you know, this is Charles Hartman, our new Director of Innovation." She gestured around the room. "Charles, you've already met Jason Reynolds, our junior engineer. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, Head of Electrical Systems. Mark Thompson, Mechanical Integration. Sophia Chen, Material Science, and the rest of the core Pulse development team." Charles shook hands with each team member, cataloging names, specialties, and the subtle hierarchies evident in their interactions. Dr. Vasquez's handshake was particularly firm, her assessment of him plainly written in her direct gaze. "Mr. Hartman," she said, "I understand you identified a thermal regulation issue in our prototype and implemented a field repair. We're all very curious about your approach." The question was both a challenge and an opportunity, his first test as their new director. Charles recognized the delicate balance he needed to strike, demonstrating expertise without undermining the team's prior work. "Perhaps I could share what I observed," he suggested, moving toward the schematics display, "and then hear your thoughts on the design considerations that led to the current configuration." It was the right approach. For the next hour, Charles led a collaborative discussion of the thermal regulation system, acknowledging the team's innovations while gently highlighting opportunities for improvement. He asked questions more than he gave answers, drawing out each engineer's perspective and weaving their insights into a more comprehensive understanding of the challenges they faced. By lunchtime, the initial wariness had largely dissolved. Even Dr. Vasquez seemed cautiously impressed, nodding thoughtfully at several of Charles's suggestions. "I propose we break for lunch," Pamela announced, "and reconvene at 1 to discuss implementation strategies." As the team dispersed, Douglas Weber appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he observed Charles in his new element. Pamela noticed him and waved him over. "Douglas, come meet our new innovation director properly, Charles. Douglas Weber, our VP of Operations and my right hand in all things logistical." Douglas's handshake was precisely calibrated, professional but cool. "Hartman, quite the entrance you've made. The board is very interested in your progress with the thermal regulation issues." "We're just getting started," Charles replied evenly, recognizing the subtle pressure being applied. "But the team is exceptionally talented. I expect we'll have a viable solution within weeks, not months." "Bold prediction," Douglas commented, raising an eyebrow. "Henderson will be delighted to hear it, or skeptical, possibly both." "Charles doesn't need to worry about Henderson," Pamela interjected smoothly. "That's my department. His focus should be entirely on innovation." Douglas conceded with a slight nod. "Of course, I merely thought our new director should understand the fiscal realities we operate within." "I appreciate the context," Charles said diplomatically. "In my experience, the best way to satisfy financial concerns is to deliver exceptional engineering." Pamela's smile indicated her approval of this response. "Precisely why you're here, Charles. Now perhaps you'll join Douglas and me for lunch. There are a few strategic matters we should discuss." The executive dining room occupied a corner of the top floor, offering panoramic views of Brighton Heights through walls of glass. Charles found himself seated at a table with Pamela and Douglas, being served a gourmet meal by attentive waitstaff. The surreal contrast with his recent life almost dizzying. "Charles will need access to the restricted archives," Pamela informed Douglas as they ate. "Specifically the original Davidson patents we acquired in the pulse technology space." Douglas paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Those files are sealed under the acquisition agreement. Legal would have to approve." "Then have legal approve it," Pamela replied calmly. "Charles needs to understand the foundation of our current systems to properly advance them." Charles watched this exchange with interest, noting the subtle power dynamics between them. "May I ask why those particular patents are restricted?" Douglas and Pamela exchanged a glance that contained volumes of unspoken history. "Woodward acquired certain intellectual property from Davidson Automotive 3 years ago," Pamela explained carefully. "Part of a broader settlement that resolved some competitive disputes." "What Pamela means," Douglas added dryly, "is that we caught Davidson infringing on our battery management patents, threatened litigation, and ended up with a package of their hybrid technology in exchange for not pursuing damages." Charles felt a cold realization forming. "These would be the hybrid engine patents from around 2014-2015? "Correct," Pamela confirmed, watching him closely. "I believe you might be familiar with the underlying technology." The irony was almost too perfect. The very patents that had been stolen from him, that had destroyed his career and upended his life, had eventually found their way to Woodward Technologies, and now, to him, their original creator. "I might have some insights," Charles acknowledged, keeping his tone neutral despite the emotional whirlwind beneath the surface. Pamela's expression suggested she understood exactly what those insights might entail. "I thought you might, which is why I'm granting you full access, effective, immediately." Douglas looked between them, clearly sensing undercurrents he wasn't privy to. "I'll have legal process the authorization this afternoon." The remainder of lunch passed with discussion of more routine matters, budget allocations, reporting structures, upcoming milestones for the Pulse program. But Charles's mind kept returning to those sealed patents, to the cosmic symmetry that had brought him full circle to the work that had once been stolen from him. By the time he returned to the innovation lab for the afternoon session, Charles had regained his equilibrium, focusing on the immediate challenges rather than the strange twists of fate that had led him here. The afternoon proved productive beyond his expectations. The team was responsive to his leadership approach, and together they mapped out a revised thermal regulation system that addressed the core issues while preserving the innovative aspects of the original design. "This could work," Dr. Vasquez acknowledged, reviewing the collaborative solution they'd developed. "The heat dissipation would improve by at least 20% without sacrificing transition speed. And it actually simplifies the manufacturing process," Mark Thompson added, examining the modified components. "We might even see a cost reduction." "Excellent work, everyone," Charles said, genuine appreciation in his voice. "Let's develop prototypes of these modifications and begin testing by the end of the week." As the meeting concluded, Charles felt a profound sense of rightness, the familiar satisfaction of solving complex problems with elegant solutions, amplified by the collaborative energy of working with a skilled team rather than struggling alone. He was gathering his notes when Jason approached, hesitant but determined. "Mr. Hartman, I was wondering if you had time for a question about the electrical routing aspect of the new design." "Of course," Charles replied, noticing the young engineer's earnest enthusiasm. "What's on your mind?" As they delved into the technical details, Charles recognized in Jason the same passion for engineering that had driven his own early career, the pure joy of understanding how things worked and making them work better. It was refreshing, untainted by the corporate politics and betrayals that had soured his experience at Davidson. Their discussion extended well past the official end of the workday, with several other team members joining to contribute ideas. By the time Charles realized the hour, it was nearly 7:00. "I should get home," he said, surprised by how quickly the time had passed. "My daughter will be wondering where I am." "The summer program starts next week, right?" Jason asked. "I have a friend who mentors there. She says your daughter's project proposal is creating quite a buzz among the faculty." Charles couldn't help the surge of pride at hearing this. Amelia's been working on it for months. It means everything to her. "Like father, like daughter," Jason observed with a smile. "Engineering in the blood." As Charles left the building, the evening air warm against his face, he found himself reflecting on Jason's comment. Engineering in the blood. A legacy he'd thought broken by betrayal and hardship, now flowing forward through Amelia and through his own unexpected second chance. The company car waiting to take him to the apartment was a tangible reminder of how dramatically his circumstances had changed. Yet as he settled into the leather seat, Charles realized that the most significant transformation wasn't the external trappings of success, but the restoration of purpose, the opportunity to again use his talents to their fullest potential. 10 years ago, he had been an engineer whose life collapsed around him. Today, he was an engineer again, but forged by adversity into someone wiser, more resilient, and perhaps finally ready to reclaim not just his profession, but the fullness of life itself. Charles's weekend was spent helping Amelia prepare for the summer engineering program, which would begin on Monday while he started his second week at Woodward Technologies. They purchased supplies, organized her project materials, and explored Brighton Heights together, gradually becoming familiar with the upscale community that was now their home. On Sunday evening, as they shared dinner on their apartment balcony, Amelia's excitement about the program was tempered by a hint of nervousness. "What if I'm not as good as they think I am?" she asked, pushing pasta around her plate. "Everyone else probably comes from fancy private schools with advanced facilities. I had to improvise half my experiments in our trailer." Charles recognized the insecurity behind her words, the same doubt he'd felt walking into Woodward's innovation lab. "That improvisation is your greatest strength," he told her. "Anyone can follow instructions with unlimited resources. It takes real talent to create solutions with constraints." Amelia considered this, then nodded slowly. "Like when you fixed Ms. Woodward's daughter's car with just your basic toolkit." "Exactly," Charles confirmed. "Sometimes limitations force innovations that perfection never discovers." The wisdom seemed to settle her concerns. They finished dinner discussing the practical aspects of her first day: transportation arrangements, schedule, what to expect from orientation. The university is sending a shuttle for all summer program participants, Amelia recited from memory. Pickup at the Westfield Apartments at 7:30 a.m. Orientation begins at 8:15. Laboratory tours at 9:30. Charles smiled at her meticulous preparation. Sounds like you've got it all planned out. I don't want to miss anything, she admitted. This is my chance to prove I belong there. You already belong, Charles assured her. They recognized your talent before they knew anything about me or my new position. Remember that. Monday morning arrived with picture-perfect clarity, as if the universe itself acknowledged the significance of this new beginning. Charles helped Amelia load her materials onto the university shuttle, watching with a mixture of pride and wistfulness as she found a seat among the other bright young minds selected for the program. Call me when you're done, he reminded her. The company car will bring me to pick you up. Dad, she groaned with typical teenage embarrassment. I can take the shuttle back to the apartments. I'm not a little kid. Humor your old man just this once, he replied with a smile. First day milestone and all that. As the shuttle pulled away, Charles felt the familiar pang of a parent witnessing their child's growing independence. He'd protected her fiercely through their hardest times. Now he needed to give her space to flourish on her own terms. The company car delivered him to Woodward headquarters, where his second week promised to be even more intense than the first. He'd spent hours over the weekend reviewing the technical specifications for the pulse system, identifying additional refinements beyond the thermal regulation issue. Charles arrived at the innovation lab to find Dr. Vasquez already there, examining prototype components for the modified design they'd developed. Early start? He asked, setting down his laptop. Never really left, she admitted, gesturing to an empty coffee cup and what appeared to be a makeshift pillow on a nearby chair. The fabrication team delivered these prototypes at midnight. I wanted to get a head start on testing. Charles studied the engineer with new appreciation. Beneath her initial skepticism lay dedication that matched his own former work habits. Find anything interesting? The heat distribution patterns are exactly as you predicted, she said, showing him thermal imaging results on her tablet. 23% improvement in dissipation efficiency. They spent the next hour discussing refinements to the prototype, joined gradually by other team members arriving for the day. By mid-morning, the lab hummed with focused energy as engineers implemented the new thermal regulation system. Charles was deep in conversation with Mark Thompson about connection tolerances when Pamela appeared at the lab entrance, accompanied by a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. Their body language suggested tension beneath polite exteriors. Charles, Pamela called, gesturing him over. I'd like you to meet Robert Henderson, one of our board members. Charles recognized the name immediately. The skeptic Douglas had mentioned, concerned about R&D expenditures. He approached with appropriate deference, extending his hand. Mr. Henderson, a pleasure. Henderson's handshake was firm but brief, his assessment of Charles swift and calculating. So you're the miracle worker Pamela's been telling us about, the mechanic who solved our thermal regulation problem overnight. The slight emphasis on mechanic wasn't lost on Charles, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I wouldn't claim any miracles, sir. Just applying fundamental engineering principles to a specific challenge. Robert is in town for a few days, Pamela explained, her tone carefully neutral. He was eager to see our progress on the pulse modifications. Very eager, Henderson agreed, his gaze sweeping the busy lab, particularly given the additional budget allocations approved last quarter. The board is quite interested in seeing tangible results from our investment. Charles recognized the corporate dance taking place, Pamela defending her department's funding, Henderson questioning its value, and himself caught in between as the latest expenditure requiring justification. Perhaps you'd like to see what we've accomplished so far, Charles suggested, guiding them toward the prototype testing area where Dr. Vasquez was running diagnostics. For the next half hour, Charles provided a detailed but accessible explanation of the thermal regulation improvements, their projected impact on performance and production costs, and the timeline for implementing them across the Pulse platform. Henderson listened with surprising attentiveness, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed an engineer's understanding beneath the financier's exterior. "You modified the connection architecture rather than redesigning the components themselves," he observed, examining the prototype. "Elegant solution. Minimizes production disruption." "That was the intention," Charles confirmed. "Maximum improvement with minimum manufacturing changes." Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "And this alternative electrical routing, your design?" "A collaborative effort," Charles corrected, gesturing toward the team working nearby. "Dr. Vasquez identified the optimal pathway once we established the new thermal parameters." A flicker of approval crossed Henderson's face at this acknowledgement of the team. He turned to Pamela. "Initial impressions are positive, Pamela. If these efficiency improvements translate to production models, the additional investment appears justified." Pamela's expression remained composed, though Charles detected a hint of satisfaction in her eyes. "I'm pleased you think so, Robert. Perhaps we should allow the team to continue their work while we discuss quarterly projections over lunch." As they prepared to leave, Henderson addressed Charles once more. "Davidson's loss appears to be Woodward's gain, Mr. Hartman. I look forward to seeing what else you bring to the table." The comment, delivered casually, left Charles momentarily speechless. Henderson knew about his history with Davidson Automotive, knowledge that complicated Charles's assessment of the board members' agenda. Once Henderson and Pamela departed, Charles returned to his team, his mind still processing the interaction. He was so absorbed in thought that he almost missed Jason's approach. "Mr. Hartman, there's someone from the university on line 3 for you. Something about your daughter." Charles felt a spike of parental alarm as he hurried to the nearest phone. "This is Charles Hartman." "Mr. Hartman, this is Professor Mitchell from Brighton University." Her tone was reassuring rather than concerned. "I wanted to let you know about a situation with Amelia's project presentation this morning." "Is everything all right?" Charles asked, tension easing slightly at her calm demeanor. "More than all right, actually. Amelia's alternative fuel efficiency concept caught the attention of our department chair. He's requested a special demonstration tomorrow for some industry partners participating in our research grant program." Pride replaced worry. As Professor Mitchell explained further, Amelia's approach to improving combustion efficiency in traditional engines, developed with limited resources in their trailer, had applications beyond what even she had envisioned. "She's quite remarkable," Professor Mitchell concluded. "Methodical, innovative, and surprisingly articulate about complex concepts. You should be very proud." "I am," Charles affirmed, emotion coloring his voice. "Thank you for letting me know." After ending the call, Charles sat quietly for a moment, processing this latest development. In less than a month, both he and Amelia had pivoted from survival mode to recognition in their respective fields. The transition was almost disorienting in its speed and scope. The afternoon passed in productive focus, with the prototype testing yielding consistently positive results. Charles lost track of time until his phone buzzed with a text message from Amelia. "Done with first day. Taking shuttle back to apartment as planned. So much to tell you." Glancing at his watch, Charles was startled to find it was already 6. He quickly wrapped up his work and informed the team he'd be leaving for the day. "Don't stay too late," he advised, noting several engineers still deeply engaged in troubleshooting. Fresh perspectives often come after proper rest. The company car delivered him to their apartment building just as Amelia was arriving on the university shuttle. She bounded toward him with infectious enthusiasm, her earlier nervousness replaced by animated excitement. "Dad, you won't believe what happened today." Charles smiled, playing along despite already knowing. "Try me." Over dinner, Amelia recounted her day in vivid detail. The laboratory facilities beyond anything she'd imagined, the brilliant students from across the country, and most significantly, the unexpected attention her project had received. "Professor Noles actually stopped his lecture when I explained my fuel efficiency concept," she marveled. "He said it was elegant in its simplicity and could have real-world applications beyond theoretical models." "That's wonderful, Leah." Charles responded, genuine happiness washing over him at her accomplishment. And tomorrow, she continued, practically vibrating with excitement, I'm presenting to actual industry people who fund university research. Professor Mitchell said they're particularly interested in applications for developing regions where high-tech solutions aren't practical. The parallel to his own engineering philosophy, elegance through constraint, wasn't lost on Charles. Like father, like daughter, he murmured, echoing Jason's earlier observation. What? Nothing, Charles smiled. Just incredibly proud of you. After dinner, as Amelia prepared her presentation materials for the next day, Charles stepped onto the balcony with a cup of coffee. The city lights sparkled below, beautiful but still unfamiliar. He found himself thinking of Woodbury Meadows, not with longing exactly, but with a kind of respectful acknowledgement of the crucible it had been. His phone rang, interrupting his contemplation. The screen displayed Pamela Woodward's name. Charles, I hope I'm not disturbing your evening, she began when he answered. Not at all, he assured her. Just enjoying the view. I wanted to follow up on Robert Henderson's visit today. Your presentation made quite an impression. He seemed satisfied with our progress, Charles acknowledged cautiously. More than satisfied, Pamela corrected. He's recommended we accelerate the Pulse program and increase your department's budget allocations. Charles absorbed this unexpected development. That's surprising given his reputation for fiscal conservatism. Robert's primary concern has always been efficient use of resources, not necessarily minimal spending, Pamela explained. He recognizes value when he sees it. There was a brief pause before she continued, her tone shifting slightly. He also mentioned your history with Davidson. Apparently, he's been following your career longer than either of us realized. Charles tensed, unsure where this revelation was leading. In what context? He was on Davidson's board 10 years ago, Pamela said carefully. During the patent disputes, he resigned shortly afterward, citing ethical concerns with their business practices. The information reframed Charles's understanding of Henderson's interest in him. Why didn't you mention this connection earlier? I only learned of it myself this afternoon, Pamela admitted. Robert was quite discreet about his reasons for supporting your appointment so enthusiastically. Charles processed this, recalling Henderson's parting comment about Davidson's loss. There were layers within layers here, corporate histories and personal agendas intertwining in ways he hadn't anticipated. What does this mean for the Pulse program? He asked, focusing on the practical implications. It means you'll have the resources you need, Pamela replied simply, and perhaps an unexpected ally on the board. After they ended the call, Charles remained on the balcony, watching the city lights and considering how the past continued to shape his present in unexpected ways. Henderson's mysterious support, his daughter's rising star at the university, his own redemptive return to engineering, all threads weaving together into a pattern he couldn't yet fully discern. Inside, he could hear Amelia practicing her presentation, her voice confident as she explained concepts that would have challenged many adults. The sound grounded him, reminding him of what truly mattered beyond corporate politics and old wounds. Whatever complications lay ahead with Henderson and the board, whatever ghosts from Davidson Automotive might still haunt his professional resurrection, Charles had achieved what once seemed impossible. He had created a path forward for himself and his daughter. As he finally turned to go inside, Charles caught sight of his reflection in the glass door. A man transformed not just by circumstances, but by his own resilience, standing at the threshold between one life and another, ready at last to step fully into the future he'd once thought forever lost. The following week unfolded with remarkable momentum. Charles and his team finalized the thermal regulation modifications for the Pulse system, with prototype testing confirming a 24% improvement in efficiency. Production implementation was scheduled for the following month, and the entire engineering department buzzed with renewed energy and purpose. Amelia's presentation to the industry partners was a resounding success. Her concept for improving fuel efficiency in traditional combustion engines using locally available catalysts had caught the attention of a foundation that funded engineering solutions for developing regions. They offered to sponsor her continued research through the summer program, and potentially beyond. I can't believe they're actually going to implement my design in a pilot program in Southeast Asia, she told Charles over celebratory ice cream. Real people might actually benefit from something I created. Charles recognized the expression on her face, the heady realization that one's work could make a tangible difference in the world. It was a feeling he'd once known and had nearly forgotten during his years of survival-focused existence. "It's only the beginning, Leah," he said, meaning every word. "You've got a lifetime of innovation ahead of you." On Friday afternoon, as Charles was reviewing project timelines with Dr. Vasquez, his assistant informed him that Pamela was requesting his presence in the executive conference room. When he arrived, he found not only Pamela but Robert Henderson and several other board members seated around the polished table. "Charles, perfect timing," Pamela greeted him. "We were just discussing the Davidson patents you've been reviewing." Charles nodded, suddenly aware that this was no casual meeting. "I've completed my analysis. There are several promising avenues for advancement that weren't fully explored in the original designs." Henderson leaned forward slightly. "And would you say these patents represent your original work from Davidson?" The directness of the question caught Charles off guard. He glanced at Pamela, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "Yes," he answered firmly. "Those core thermal regulation principles were my designs. Davidson appropriated them after forcing me out during my wife's illness." Henderson exchanged looks with the other board members. "That confirms our suspicions. We've been conducting our own investigation into the provenance of the technology we acquired from Davidson." "Charles," Pamela said, "we believe Woodward may have inadvertently become the beneficiary of intellectual property that was unethically, possibly illegally, taken from you. The board has been discussing how to address this situation." Charles felt a strange vertigo, the past and present colliding in ways he couldn't have imagined. "I'm not sure I understand." "It's quite simple," Henderson stated. "We propose to formally credit you as the original inventor on all relevant patents and establish appropriate compensation for their use over the past decade." For a moment, Charles couldn't speak. After years of fighting and ultimately surrendering his claim to his own work, after rebuilding his life from the ashes of that defeat, justice was being offered to him on a silver platter. "Why?" he finally managed. "You have no legal obligation to do this." "No legal obligation, perhaps," Henderson agreed, "but a moral one. I was on Davidson's board when they took your work. I resigned when I realized what had happened, but I didn't do enough to stop it." He paused, meeting Charles's gaze directly. "Some wrongs can be righted, Mr. Hartman, even after 10 years. Charles left the meeting in a daze, the papers he'd signed guaranteeing not just recognition for his past innovations, but substantial compensation that would finally close the financial wounds left by Sarah's illness and his professional exile. It felt surreal, a resolution so complete that he'd stopped hoping for it years ago. When he told Amelia that evening, her initial response was confusion, followed by a dawning understanding of what this meant for them both. "So all those times you were working late in our trailer, trying to fix other people's engines," she said slowly. "You were actually the person who invented parts of the engines to begin with." "Something like that," Charles acknowledged with a wry smile. Amelia shook her head, processing the irony. "And now the company that ended up with your designs is making it right?" Thanks in large part to one board member who remembered the truth. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Does this change things for us? Are we going back to Woodbury?" Charles considered the question carefully. "No. Our life is here now. This just means we can build something more permanent, maybe buy a house instead of renting. And your college fund is now fully secured, wherever you choose to go." Amelia hugged him fiercely, understanding the weight lifted from his shoulders. Mom would be so happy to see this. "Yes," Charles whispered, returning her embrace. "She would." The summer passed with a rhythm that gradually became familiar. Charles settled into his role at Woodward, guiding the innovation team toward increasingly ambitious goals for the next generation of hybrid systems. The pulse modifications were implemented ahead of schedule and under budget, earning his department accolades from even the most skeptical board members. Amelia thrived in the summer program, her project evolving from a theoretical concept to a practical application under development for testing in rural communities. Professor Mitchell had already approached Charles about early admission to Brighton's undergraduate engineering program the following year, with a full scholarship. By August, they had purchased a modest but elegant home in a tree-lined neighborhood halfway between Woodward Technologies and Brighton University. It was nothing ostentatious. Charles found he had little taste for luxury despite his improved circumstances, but it was solidly built, with a dedicated workshop space in the basement where he could tinker and a sunny study for Amelia's research. On moving day as the professional movers, a luxury Charles still found slightly embarrassing, carried in their few possessions and the new furniture they'd purchased, Benjamin Lopez arrived unexpectedly, his pickup truck parked at the curb. "Ben!" Charles exclaimed, genuinely pleased to see his old neighbor. "What are you doing here?" "Brought you a housewarming gift," Benjamin explained, leading Charles to his truck. "Couldn't let the moving company handle this." In the truck bed, carefully wrapped in blankets, was Amelia's garden, the plants she'd nurtured in their tiny plot at Woodbury Meadows, now transplanted into portable containers. Benjamin dug them up himself, came another familiar voice. Mrs. Peterson stood beside the truck, her weathered face creased in a smile. "Said you two should have a piece of home to take with you." Charles was momentarily speechless, touched by the unexpected gesture. "How did you even find us?" Benjamin grinned. "Small-town mechanic to big-shot engineer makes the local paper, Charlie. Your address wasn't exactly state secret." Amelia emerged from the house, her expression lighting up at the sight of their visitors and her rescued plants. "Mrs. Peterson, Benjamin." She hurried to inspect the containers. "My tomatoes! And the herbs! I can't believe you saved them." "Couldn't let all that hard work go to waste," Benjamin said, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Where do you want them?" They spent the afternoon establishing the garden in its new location, a sunny corner of the backyard that Amelia had already designated for planting. Mrs. Peterson produced a picnic basket from Benjamin's truck, fried chicken, potato salad, and of course, her famous apple pie. And they shared an impromptu housewarming meal on the back patio. As the sun began to set, Charles walked his old friends to Benjamin's truck, a comfortable silence between them that spoke of connections that transcended circumstances. "You're looking good, Charlie," Mrs. Peterson said finally, patting his arm. "Got your spark back." "Thanks to both of you," Charles replied sincerely, "for everything." Benjamin shrugged off the gratitude. Just neighbors looking out for each other. That's what people do. "Well, consider yourselves neighbors for life," Charles told them. "No matter where we all live." After they departed, Charles returned to the backyard where Amelia was watering her transplanted garden in the fading light. "It was nice of them to come all this way," she said, not looking up from her careful work. "Yes," Charles agreed, watching her methodical movements. The same careful attention she brought to her engineering designs, now focused on nurturing growing things. Some connections aren't limited by distance. "Like you and Mom?" Amelia asked softly, finally meeting his gaze. Charles nodded, the question touching something deep within him. "Like me and your mother." That evening, after Amelia had gone to bed, Charles sat alone in his new workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, some old and worn from his years as a handyman, others new and gleaming, provided by Woodward Technologies. On the workbench before him lay a small velvet box containing Sarah's wedding ring, which he'd kept in his pocket for so many years. Beside it was a framed photograph, their family when it was whole, Sarah holding baby Amelia, Charles with his arm around them both, all three bathed in sunlight at a park long ago. He picked up the frame, studying Sarah's face, the intelligence and warmth in her eyes, the way she'd always looked at him with complete confidence in his abilities, even when he doubted himself. "We made it, Sarah," he said quietly to the photograph. "Not the way we planned, but we made it." He opened the velvet box and removed the ring, feeling its familiar weight in his palm. For years, it had been his talisman, a tangible connection to everything he'd lost. Now, he realized, it could be something else, a symbol not just of grief, but of enduring love that had shaped him into the man he'd become. Charles carefully placed the ring on a slender silver chain, a gift he'd chosen for Amelia's upcoming 17th birthday. Tomorrow, he would tell her the story of the ring, of her mother's brilliance and compassion, of the love that had sustained them through darkness and into light again. It was time for the ring to become not just a reminder of loss, but a legacy of hope, passed from one generation to the next. As he secured the chain and returned it to the velvet box, Charles felt a sense of completion, of a circle closing even as new possibilities opened before him. He'd spent a decade defined by what had been taken from him: his career, his wife, his sense of purpose. Now, finally, he was defined not by loss, but by reclamation, by the strength he'd found in his darkest moments and the future he was building with his daughter. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, nourishing Amelia's transplanted garden. Inside, in the quiet of his new workshop, Charles Hartman smiled, a man who had fixed what was broken, improved what was functional, and found his way home after a long and winding journey. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the rain-washed world glittering with possibility. Charles arrived at Woodward Technologies earlier than usual, drawn by a new idea that had come to him during the night, a refinement to the next-generation hybrid system that might further improve efficiency while reducing production costs. He was sketching the concept when Pamela appeared at his office door, coffee in hand. "You're here early. Something promising?" Charles nodded, turning his tablet to show her the design. "I think we can reduce the complexity of the power transition module without sacrificing performance. It would make manufacturing simpler and more cost-effective." Pamela studied the sketch, her expression shifting from curiosity to excitement. "This is exactly the kind of innovation we need for the global market expansion. How soon can we prototype?" "I'd like to run it by the team first," Charles replied. "Get their input, see if we can refine it further before committing resources." "The collaborative approach," Pamela noted with approval. "Robert Henderson mentioned you'd be presenting at the board meeting next week. I assume this will be part of it." "If the initial simulations look promising," Charles confirmed. "I don't want to promise more than we can deliver." "Wise," Pamela said. She hesitated, then added, "You know, when Audrey's car broke down that night, I never imagined we'd find not just an engineer but a true innovator, someone who could transform our entire approach." Charles smiled at the memory of that roadside repair, the moment that had set everything in motion. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple act of helping someone in need. "Indeed," Pamela agreed. "And speaking of journeys, how is Amelia's project progressing?" "Beyond expectations," Charles said, unable to hide his pride. "The prototype is being prepared for field testing in Vietnam next month. Professor Mitchell says she's never seen a first-year student advance a project so quickly from concept to implementation." "Like father, like daughter," Pamela observed, echoing the phrase that had become a familiar refrain. As she departed for her own meetings, Charles turned back to his design, the creative energy flowing through him with a familiar but long-absent vitality. This was what he'd been born to do, to see possibilities where others saw problems, to find elegant solutions where others saw only complexity. His phone chimed with a text message from Amelia. "Big breakthrough with the catalyst formula. Professor Knowles says we might be able to patent it. Can we celebrate tonight?" Charles typed his reply. "Absolutely. Proud of you, Leah. Your mom would be too." He returned to his work, but his thoughts lingered on the journey that had brought them here. From a weathered trailer at Woodbury Meadows to the cutting edge of automotive innovation and engineering research. From a man fixing Mrs. Peterson's truck for $20 to a director guiding the future of hybrid technology. From a girl conducting experiments with improvised equipment to a young scientist whose work might improve lives across the globe. It had begun with a broken-down car on a lonely stretch of road, with hands that remembered how to create even when the world had forgotten their value, with talent hiding in plain sight until someone bothered to truly see it. Charles glanced at the photograph on his desk. Amelia at the Summer Program Awards ceremony, her face alight with the joy of recognition, of belonging in a world that appreciated her gifts. Beside it stood another frame, newer but containing an older image: Charles, Sarah, and infant Amelia, the family that had been and, in a different form, still was. Outside his office window, the Woodward Technologies campus hummed with purpose, with the collective energy of minds working to solve tomorrow's problems. Inside, Charles Hartman, engineer, father, survivor, opened his tablet and began to create, his fingers moving with the certainty of a man who had found his way home at last. The helicopter that had once seemed so extraordinary, landing in the community field of Woodbury Meadows, was now just another tool in a life rebuilt from foundation to rooftop. The journey had been unexpected, marked by loss and struggle, by chance encounters and deliberate choices. But as Charles refined his latest design, he understood with quiet certainty that this was exactly where he was meant to be, not despite the hardships he'd endured, but because of them. They had forged in him a resilience and perspective that made his work richer, his innovations more practical, his appreciation for second chances more profound. And in his daughter's achievements, in her growing confidence and brilliance, he saw not just Sarah's legacy, but the fulfillment of a promise he'd made long ago beside a hospital bed: that Amelia would have every opportunity to become whoever she was meant to be, that her path would not be limited by circumstance or tragedy. Promise kept, Sarah, he thought, as the morning sun illuminated his workspace. Promise kept.